We are on with our next session. I'm very excited about this. Joe, Tyler, and Cate, all my colleagues here at Tableau. VizQL Data Service is something that we've been talking about for a really long time, and I'm just very excited to see it come to the market here. So this is a forward-looking thing, so be ready, data fam. This is going to be a good one. So without further ado, Joe, Tyler, Cate, take it away. And you're on mute. That mute button, technology's still hard. Still can't hear you, Joe. Oh, Joe's not on mute. Joe's going to reload. Okay. Now I'll do a slight song and dance while we're getting ready for this. Yes. Thank you again for, there we go.
I had to reload. I don't know what's going on there. Sorry about that.
No worries, Joe. Thanks again.
Yep. All right. Let's get started. Hi, DataDev community. How's it going? I'm Joe Chirlov. I'm a product manager here at Tableau. I hope you're excited to learn about VizQL Data Service. We are very excited to share it with you and show you how you can leverage it to infuse data everywhere. Now, before I get into all that, the lawyers tell me I have to show this slide. Please remember that Salesforce is a publicly traded company, and you should base your purchasing decisions only on our in-market products and services. Now, I want to start by saying a big thank you for being a part of DataDev Day and for choosing to invest your time with us. Without you, truly, none of this would be possible. And I hope you take something away that will impact and inspire the work that you do. All right, let me do some intros. So as I mentioned briefly, I'm a director of product management. I've had the privilege of working here at Tableau for almost about 5 years. And this is my first time getting to talk at DataDev Day, and I am super honored to present to you all. I brought with me today some real big guns. My co-speakers are not just great presenters, but they are the actual engineers building the exciting feature we'll be talking about today. Tyler, a senior software engineering manager, he's been with the company for 8 years. You might recognize him and our next speaker as previous participants from the Devs on Stage keynotes at past Tableau conferences. And that leads me to Cate. Cate is a software engineer approaching her 5th year at Tableau as well. And she harnesses a real deep understanding of VizQL Data Service. All right, let's talk quickly about our agenda today. I'm going to kick this off with an overview of VDS and how it helps customers solve their day-to-day problems. Then I'm going to pass it over to Cate, and she'll step us through a high-level showcase of the tool in Postman. Following that, Cate and Tyler are going to take turns showing us a series of deep dive examples of how you can leverage VDS. Okay, let's get going. Now, when most people think about surfacing insights with Tableau, they think about using their data to build a viz. And most times, in order to ensure that you're building accurate insights that truly reflect the way the business operates, you're probably spending considerable energy in shaping and defining and refining the data model semantics that go into that viz. And you're oftentimes storing those in a published data source. I'm guessing that resonates with a lot of folks here. And that maybe begs a follow-up question, which is, if I've invested time and resources into building published data sources that represent the source of truth for my business, why can't I use that data source in other workflows and solutions? Is there a way that my published data source data can be leveraged without having to create a viz? Well, my data dev friends, this is where VizQL Data Service comes in. We're excited to share that we are opening up Tableau's core analytical engine as a service, callable through APIs. How does it work? VDS exposes Tableau's data modeling and calculation capabilities to third-party software, allowing you to create unique analytical experiences with the same data that drives your Tableau visualizations. By centralizing the semantics of your existing data model into a single source, that published data source, you can be sure that your users are accessing the most accurate, the most consistent, and the most up-to-date information. Now, this API isn't released yet, and we'll talk later about how you can try it out. But the underlying infrastructure is something we've been working on for a while, and it's a key part of what powers some of our newest features, such as the Tableau Pulse metrics layer. Okay, I've spent enough time talking about it, and now I'm going to pass it over to Cate so we can see it in action. Over to you, Cate.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Hello, my name is Cate Guyman. Hoping I don't have the same issues as Joe. Everyone can hear me. All right. So yeah, I'm going to kick off today's demo section by walking you through just a couple examples of basic queries that you can run against your published data sources to extract your data to use in any way you want. But before we jump into the details of the interface itself, what I really want to illustrate is that this API is still grounded in Tableau. And what I mean by that is that it's accessing the same underlying data that the Viz shows. So to illustrate this, let's actually start in Tableau. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Or not quite yet? Yes, okay. Cool. I can't see my screen on the call, so good to know. Okay, so here we are in Tableau Desktop, and we have connected to this published data source called eBikes. And we're going to be using the same published data source for the rest of our demos today. So let's actually start by just familiarizing ourselves a little bit with some of the fields here. We have information about accounts. We have information about different e-bike products. And we have different information about orders that this e-bikes supplier is tracking with this data source. So let's actually start by just dragging a couple different fields out onto the view. I'm going to start by dragging out product family, and we'll reconnect here. And let's do sum of units onto text. So behind the scenes, Tableau has issued a query, and it's returned to us some data from our published data source. I want to now show you how to extract these exact same numbers that the visualization is showing using VizQL Data Service. So let's pop on over to Postman. If you guys don't know what Postman is, it's pretty easy to understand. It's over here on the right. It's just a platform that's going to allow us to create, share, and test APIs that a lot of developers use and are familiar with. And we're going to use Postman today to write queries to VizQL Data Service. So over here on the right...
Cate, we can't see Postman, though.
Interesting. Okay.
We can see Tableau. Maybe you're only sharing the Tableau window?
I'm sharing my full screen. So this morning when I did check, I noticed that sometimes there's a bit of a delay. Let me try and reshare my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, how about now?
That's great. I can see it.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'm glad you said something, Kevin. Okay, so over here on the right, here we are in Postman. And I've actually already set up the first VizQL Data Service query that we're going to use today. So a VizQL Data Service request has two parts to it. The first part is the connection object. The connection object simply just says, which published data source do I want to query and where does it live? So this one, I've already pre-populated the values with environment variables for the purpose of this demo. So we're not going to focus too much on that. Instead, we're going to focus on the second part, which is the query object. The query is the meat of how you specify how you want to pull data and which data you want to pull. So at its core, a query is simply just a list of columns and an optional list of filters. So here we have our list of columns. The first column is a dimension, which is product family. So all I need to do is pass in the field name. The second column is a measure, which means I need the field name, units, and an aggregation, which is sum. Let's send this request. When the request returns, you can see that we just pulled the exact same data that the Viz is showing over on the left into Postman on the right. These two queries are equivalent, and we've just written our first one, which is awesome. Okay, so you'll remember that I said that a query is just a list of columns and an optional list of filters. And I have shown you so far 2 ways that we can specify columns. For dimensions, we just pass in the column name, and for measures, we pass in the column name as well as the aggregation. So what I want to show you next is how we would pass in a calculation. Okay, so let's this time check out our second request. This time we're going to do product name, and we'll reconnect once again. And let's do profit margin, which is this custom calculation. Let's check out the formula for profit margin. Profit margin is sum of sales minus sum of product price. So as you can see here over on the right, and this time in our query, we have 2 columns still. We have our dimension, which is product name. And then for our custom calculation, we just give it a name, any old name that we want, because we're making this on the fly. And then we type in our calculation formula, which is the same one that you see over here on the left. Let's click send. And once again, it's returning all of the same data. So that's it. At this point, we've mastered how to write columns. There's just 3 ways. There's dimensions, measures, and custom calculations. Now we're going to move on to filters. So the first kind of filter I'm going to show you is a quantitative filter. So let's go back to our original query. And let's say we want to filter down the results here to only show product families that have over 100,000 units sold. So I'm going to drag units to the filter shelf. I'm going to click sum. I'm going to say at least because we want a minimum of 100,000. Okay, Tableau has filtered this down. Now let's build it in VizQL Data Service. Here, my columns are the same as you've already seen. For each filter, you need 2 things. You need the filter type. In this case, it's quantitative because we're filtering on a measure. And then you need the column that you're filtering on. In this case, it's sum of units. For quantitative filters, you can either do a minimum, a maximum, or a range. In this case, it's a minimum. So we specify what that minimum is, 100,000. It returned, once again, the same data. Okay, I'm going to show you another filter type. This one is my personal favorite. Let's say we want to show the top 10 states that have the most units sold. This is a top N filter. So I'm going to drag out state onto rows. I'm going to drag out units onto text. And then let's actually add a filter on state. We're going to say we want top by field. And it's going to show us the top 10 sum of units. Clicking OK will filter down to just the states that have the most units sold. Over in VizQL Data Service, our columns are going to be state and sum of units. And this time, our filter type is top. The column that we're filtering on is state. The field that we're measuring against is sum of units. How many is 10, and we want the top instead of the bottom. Looks like California has the most units sold, which is not surprising because it's a pretty big state. All right, I have walked you through a couple awesome examples. I also just want to call out, even though I'm not going to explicitly demo it here, that we also allow for different kinds of output formatting. So for example, we will allow users to sort their columns. You can provide aliases to refer to your columns later. We also allow for different number formatting. And as you can see, this is returning JSON objects, which makes it really easy to use. But we can also return the data in a more array style, which is more friendly for developers who are trying to, do things with their data in their applications. And so far today, I've been very explicitly demoing our VizQL Data Service data side by side with Tableau. And I've done that very intentionally to illustrate that, these are the same, it's the same data, it's just two different ways to return it. But actually, one of the key benefits of VizQL Data Service is that you don't need Tableau, the application, at all. Like, this is going to let you get your data from your data sources totally outside of the context of Tableau. So let's actually just get rid of Tableau and go straight into Postman. And can someone confirm that you can see only Postman now and not Tableau?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, awesome. Don't know what was happening before. I'm glad we're on board now. Okay, so now we're just in Postman. We don't have access to Tableau. We're trying to write queries, and you might have the question, okay, if I don't have Tableau available, how do I know what fields are available to me in my data source so that I can actually write my queries? So I'm going to introduce you to our second endpoint. This one is called read metadata. For the read metadata endpoint, you only need the connection object. When we click send, it's going to return to us a list of all of the different columns in our data source. It's going to give us the column name, which we can refer to in the queries, as well as some metadata about those columns. So if I were inside my application, if I didn't have access to Tableau, and I wanted to start writing my queries, this would be the entry point to kind of like get a handle on what sorts of data is in my data source. Okay, that almost wraps up this section of the demo. I want to show you one more filter type that's going to be a smooth transition for some of our applications of VizQL Data Service, and that's going to be a set filter. A set filter is a dimension filter. So basically what it allows me to do is specify exactly what fields of a certain dimension I want to be included or excluded. So in this case, I'm going to have 3 columns: product family, which we've seen before, sum of sales, and sum of units. This time my filter type is set. I'm filtering on product family. And remember how I had 4 product family types? Well, we're going to say, actually, we only want to include 2 of them, which is Dynamo and Electra. Okay, the results of this data show sum of sales and sum of units for product families just Dynamo and Electra. I'm now going to pass it back to Tyler, who's going to show us how this exact query is going to be really useful for a real-world application of some cool things you might want to do with VizQL Data Service.
Hello, and thank you, Cate. That was a perfect transition into the next part of the talk. We're going to give you guys a couple examples now that you're familiar with what the API is capable of doing and how roughly to use it, what you might do with it. Here's our first example that I'm going to dive into, and that query will be a perfect segue for understanding it. I'm going to talk a little bit about a process that we call automated data bursting. So I'd like to paint you a little bit of a picture of a tedious and repetitious task that we've heard many businesses face. As a business, say selling e-bikes, you have a wonderfully manicured published data source, as you see here on the screen, about your e-bikes business. And you have several key business signals, things such as units and sales about that business. And many of your business processes rely on you extracting that data and sending it to different partners on a regular schedule. So you pull that data out and you send it to them. But wait, there's a problem here. You can't just send all of your data to all of your different partners. You really need to send just the parts of the data that are relevant to that partner to those partners. So you can't just take it all out and send it on. And they probably want that data in some sort of like a basic tabular format. Not all of our different partners out there are, powered Tableau users who want like a filterable viz and view, or maybe they need it in some sort of tabular format to drive their business processes, etc. So today, in order to do this, you have to build some sort of a fancy ETL pipeline. You have to connect to all your same underlying data sources. You have to rebuild your data model that you've built for your published data source and any kind of Tableau vizes you've built. And then you have to refilter and aggregate and pull the data you're interested in order to send it to partners. This can be really painful. It can be difficult to automate. It can be difficult to rebuild that data model. And more than anything else, we've heard from many people that this ends up being someone's job. It's just tedious. They have to do this and run it all the time and send out the data. So let me show you how the VizQL Data Service API can actually make this a lot easier. If we start with the same published data source, and we start writing a VizQL Data Service API call, where we're fetching those important business signals, the things in my example like the units and the sales. And then we apply some of the filters that Cate just showed you, where we filter out for our different partners, say the product families that they care about and help us with. So in this example, if you run across the top row, our partner A helps us in this example with the product family Fuse. So I can use that as a filter to limit the query and the data that I extract to them and send on. And as I continue down the examples, partner B helps us with Volt, and partner C helps us with both Dynamo and Electra. So in a few simple queries, we're able to specify the information we need to send to our partners, limit the scope to what's relevant to them, and we could even stack other filter pieces together, kind of like Lego blocks or like different pills you drag out in a Tableau Viz style way. You could add a date relevancy here, limit it to 30 days as you build a process around that. And in just a few simple queries, we've extracted just the data that our partners need, and we can automate a way of sending it to them. Super simple, much easier. And now that was just one very specific example of what you could do. So I'd actually like to welcome Cate back, who's going to walk us through another example that you could use VizQL Data Service APIs for.
That's right. Okay, thanks, Tyler. Okay, so everyone clip in and buckle your helmets. We're shifting gears. Sorry, bear with me. I love my puns. We're going to see another example of what you can do with VizQL Data Services. So when I consider how I want to use data in my applications, the first thing that comes to mind for me is automation. Because when we have programmatic access to a data via an API, we can set up queries that drive behavior in our application, which you could not do before VizQL Data Service. So here's an application that we can use as an example. We've built this application using our eBikes published data source. You could either log in as Mario, who is a supplier, and he manages his partnerships with all of the eBikes retailer shops, or we can log in as Mackenzie, who owns a bike shop called Wheelworks. So let's log in as Mackenzie, and when we go to product catalog, we can see a list of all of the current products that Mackenzie is selling. And one thing I'm going to call out is that in the top right corner for each of these bikes, it renders either $1, $2, or $3 signs. This is super useful because at one single glance, Mackenzie can instantly do analytics on which of her products are selling the best. I'm going to give you a hint. These dollar signs are rendered with a VizQL Data Service query. And because of the earlier demo where I showed you guys how to write queries, we can actually all understand how to write this query and how this data is being pulled. So let's pedal back into the code, and I'm going to show you how. Okay, here is our query. We have our connection object. This is going to point us towards our eBikes data source. Then we have our columns. We just have two columns here. We have product name, and you'll notice that I've given an alias so that I can refer to this in other parts of my code, and also a sort priority. Our other column is sum of sales. Then we have a set filter. We're filtering on account name because we don't want to show eBikes from all of the different accounts. We only want to show Mackenzie's eBikes. So we're going to filter for Wheelworks, which is the value of the user that is currently logged in. And that's it. This is VizQL Data Service in action. So pretty electric, if you ask me. Okay, using this portal, I'm going to show you one more example of a query that's driving automation. Let's log in, this time as Mario. Mario wants to do analytics to manage his relationships with his bike shops. And as you'll notice, the first thing that I see is that he has 3 notifications. Looking at the value of these notifications, it's showing us which products at which of his different retail partners have a high rate of returns. This is super important for Mario to know so that he can start thinking about what bikes are being returned at a high rate. Going into my file notification bell over in my code base is going to show us the query that's powering these notifications. This time I have 3 columns. Account name, so that would be Trailblazers, Wheelworks, etc. Product name, which would be, Volt, Electra, Fuse. And then finally, I have a custom calculation here. This is called return percentage. And the formula says sum up all of the values that were returned and then divide it by the total count. Finally, we have another filter here. Now, this is a kind of filter I haven't showed you all yet, but it's not too hard to understand. This is a relative date filter. So we're filtering on the column date, and we're saying that we only want to show the last 30 days of values. This is because we want our notifications to be recent and fresh. Okay, I hope these examples have given you guys some inspiration about how you might want to use automation to power, or VizQL Data Service to power automation in your own applications. I'm now going to pass it back to Tyler, who's going to show you one last real-world example of how you could use VizQL Data Service.
All right, thanks again, Cate. Well, it wouldn't be 2024 if we didn't talk about AI. So for the final example here, I'm going to give you a little bit of a use case for how the VizQL Data Service APIs could actually help power AI applications. And specifically, I want to talk a little bit about a process called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, and how our APIs could help power applications by making them more accurate through RAG. In order to explain that a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about what RAG is, in case many of you are not familiar. I am by no means an expert on this. This was an area that I was made more aware of, so I too have been learning this area, but it's kind of broken down here in a nice slide, so it's fairly simple to understand. RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, is an AI architecture that combines components of both a retrieval-based model as well as a generative-based model. So when a user asks a question, it can not only generate coherent content, but can also pull contextually relevant responses for those questions. So it helps ground the generative pieces with actual retrieved content. But you might be asking, so how does VizQL Data Service fit in? Well, the retrieval component leverages VizQL Data Service to retrieve relevant information from your published data sources, and then using the contextual data returned, the pre-trained generative component can construct a natural language response around that information. So the result is an AI application that uses your data to improve accuracy in responses, but most importantly, without actually training on that data. So it's not trained, it's not baked into the pre-trained model. It's two different components working well together to produce a better application. So now that we've got a little bit of the basics out of the way and you have a rough idea what I might be talking about here, I'm going to share an example RAG application that one of our sales consultants built. So first off, I'm not going to take credit for building it, but I do have the privilege of sharing it with you here. So bear with me one moment while I share the application here. There we go. And hopefully that's coming through. I can see it now. All right. So this here is a simple application that we built. It's got a page with some embedded views and other Tableau elements for people to use. But it also has this cool chat bot down in the bottom right corner that I've already opened and has a window for me to type some prompts into. So this is the chat interface that's built on top of the RAG application as a demo here. So let's actually start by asking it some questions. The first question I'm going to ask is, what are my top 5 states by sales? And as it processes the question, hopefully it will come back with a response. And there we are. It responds that the top 5 states by sales are California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois. This is how the generative response has understood the natural language of my question, has formulated into queries, has understood the things that it has in that vector store that it ultimately pulled through the VizQL Data Service APIs and from the published data source, understands it has contextual information for those, assembles the right relevant pieces of information together, and produces natural language response for us here. And those probably look like right answers if you remember some of the queries Cate ran earlier, particularly with California being on top. But when I asked the question, I really kind of wanted it to actually give me the values as part of the answer. So we can actually just ask that. It's one of the advantages of the natural language style elements of a project like this. It can understand context and stitch together information. So if we ask it to provide the values, here it can respond with the same answers, and there with the values that go along with them, justifying the response. So we all know that these models can be pretty flexible and supportive, but what's really cool about the Treeable component and with VizQL Data Service plugged in, that the answers can be much more reliable. These answers are in your data model. Like, it's not making up how much, sales these states had, it's fetching that. And so a little bit of a piece of the flexibility to demonstrate, we can also request it to output this in a few different formats as well. So I could actually ask for this to come back as a markdown table, and it can respond in a different format with the exact same information. And again, importantly, it's responding with the exact same numbers. It's not making them up. And we can also respond or ask for it in a markdown code block. Again, different output, different styles. If I was looking to copy and paste these into systems looking for different pieces, there it is. And some of you may be asking, well, what if I ask these questions next month? Well, the great thing about the RAG, remember, is that we didn't connect our data into the pre-training of the model. So the answers aren't baked in. It's actually connecting through and fetching information from those vector stores. And we're able to use the VizQL Data Service APIs to refresh those vector stores with new data as often we'd like as part of our business process. So if we ask the same questions next month, we'll actually have different answers and different values, because the generative model helps to build and translate the natural language questions and responses, but it constantly is pulling real accurate data from the vector stores, from our APIs, and ultimately from the published data sources. So the model stays accurate without ever training on your data and staying relevant. To demo a few more questions, I will ask a slightly different prompt. If we go with sum of sales by product family, we can see if it's able to pull these kinds of questions from the data source for us. So there it is. There's the 4 product families you saw earlier in the demo, and the sum of sales that go along with them. And we can also ask for an entirely different question we haven't shown you anything of before, just to show it's pulling other things from the data source. How about units by shipping type? Well, here, not having seen any of this data so far in the entire demo, we can learn a couple of key things really easily by asking a question like this. We know that we've got 3 different shipping types: 1 day, 2 day, standard, and these are roughly how many units we're shipping through those different pieces. So obviously standard deliveries are most popular, but not too far behind is 2-day shipping. So good to know for the business. And really the power of a lightweight application like this and getting tied to data models is you can answer and learn really quick things about your data model. Pretty cool. That's about all I have to show you, but I do have an extra minute. And something we discovered when having built this, and this is something we did not specifically build in any way, but one of the powers of that flexibility on the generative component is that I can actually ask the same questions in an entirely different language. The sales consultant who helped build this application is a native Spanish speaker, and so was demoing it to me. And I found this incredibly cool, that if we actually ask the same question I started with in Spanish, which was about our states, it's actually able to interpret this, understand what the question is, still find the relevant information into the knowledge stores, and pull back those same pieces of information. And to kind of complete the demo here, I could even ask for it to show the values like I did in the initial question, along with those states. And again, it reinterprets the information, pulls it back, and you can even tell that it's kind of responding a little bit with the correct language in order to kind of adapt to the way I'm asking questions. So some really cool technologies of how AI can be built on top of different technologies. And in particular, if you're interested in using RAG, trying to ground questions and answers into your data sources, the VizQL Data API can be a really awesome way to connect those together and ground the answers of the applications that you build. So our last cool example of today. And with that, I am going to go ahead and actually pass it back to Joe to wrap us up.
All right, thanks. Can you all confirm that you can hear me this time?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to our presentation, and thanks to my co-presenters for joining me today. I hope from the examples you've seen here, you've gotten some ideas, maybe some inspiration for how you might want to use this in your own situation. And so with that in mind, I want to also share that we do have a dev preview early pilot release coming up pretty imminently. I probably can't commit or promise a particular date, but I'll say it lands in a month that starts with J and has 4 letters in it. So if you really want to get on to this, there's an email address on this slide here, VizQL Data Service at salesforce.com. Shoot me an email at that address, and I'll make sure you get added to the preview notification when that goes out. Would love to have as many of you that are interested playing with the service and giving us feedback on how it's working for you. That's about all that I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Cate. Thanks, Tyler. I think we have a minute or two to answer a question here, and Dan is ready to go. So thank you for being here. Is this coming to cloud and server, Joe?
Yeah, our hope is to deliver it everywhere.
Fantastic. And there was someone who asked a question about the cache concepts or being dependent on the remote database. Cate made a very great response, but go ahead.
Yeah, Cate also, already gave a good response there. I'll just say that the way to think about the VizQL Data Service when you're accessing the API, the perf characteristics are going to be similar to as if you were in Tableau connecting to your published data source. So yes, like if that PDS is built on a live connection, it's going to make live queries. We could consider some optimizations in the future, but for now, it's kind of like it's the same, same expectation as what you'd have in the Tableau product.
Awesome. And then Matt asked about JSON or XML. Yep, this is JSON. Modern coding file formats. So thank you again to Joe, Cate, and Tyler, and the entire team. Thank you guys so much. I'm really excited to see what everyone could do with this. The team is playing around with it internally, and you're throwing RAG systems at it. So very excited to see this come. So thank you again to the team.
Thank you.